What if I told you that in 2007, an 11-year-old boy sat in front of scientists in Russia and calmly said, "I've already seen how it all ends"? What if I told you that the same boy described nuclear disasters, energy wars, and the fall of entire nations with a precision that made grown men go silent? And what if I told you that years later, when his predictions started coming true one by one, he vanished without a trace, leaving behind only one final warning? The future can be changed, but time is running out? This is not science fiction. This is not a movie plot. This is the story of Boriska Kapryanovich, the boy who claimed he came from the future, and what he told us about what's coming might change everything you thought you knew about time, reality, and the fate of our world. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll understand why some people believe he was silenced, and why his message matters now more than ever. Before we dive deep into this mystery, let me ask you something. Have you ever met someone who just knew things they should know? A child who speaks like an old soul? Someone whose eyes carry the weight of experiences that don't match their age? Keep that feeling in mind, because that's exactly what happened in a small Russian city in 2007. And what came next shocked everyone who witnessed it. The year is 2007. The place is Volgograd, Russia, a city that carries its own heavy history. This is the city formerly known as Stalingrad, where one of the bloodiest battles in human history took place. It's a place where the past feels alive, where memory seems to seep through the streets. And it's here, in this city haunted by its own history, that a boy named Boriska Kapryanovich stood in front of scientists, journalists, and researchers and said something that would echo through the years to come. Boriska was 11 years old. Just 11. An age when most kids are worried about video games, school grades, and what's for dinner. But Boriska wasn't talking about any of that. He was talking about the end of the world. He was talking about Mars. He was talking about wars that hadn't happened yet. And he was talking with a calmness, a certainty, that made everyone in that room deeply uncomfortable. Imagine being in that room. Imagine watching this child, with his clear eyes and steady voice, describing catastrophic events with the same casual tone you'd use to describe yesterday's weather. The scientists didn't know whether to dismiss him as a confused kid with an overactive imagination, or to take notes on every single word he said. But here's the thing that made them listen. Boriska wasn't just making vague predictions. He was giving details. Specific details. Technical details that an 11-year-old shouldn't even understand, let alone know. Now, before we go further, I need you to do something for me. I need you to subscribe to this channel. I know, everyone asks for subscriptions, but here's why this matters. We're a new channel dedicated to uncovering stories like this. Stories about time travel, unexplained phenomena, and mysteries that challenge everything we think we know. If you don't subscribe, you might miss the next story, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming. Hit that subscribe button right now. It takes 1 second. Do it. I'll wait. Good. Now let's talk about what Boriska actually said, because this is where things get really strange. Boriska claimed he had memories of a past life, but not just any past life. He claimed he had lived on Mars. Yes, Mars, the red planet. And according to him, he remembered the destruction of Martian civilization. He described it in detail. Advanced technology, atmospheric catastrophes, nuclear wars that tore the planet apart. He talked about underground cities, about desperate attempts to save what was left, about watching his world die. Now, you might be thinking, okay, this is just a kid with a wild imagination who watched too many science fiction movies. Fair enough, but here's where it gets weird. Boriska didn't just talk about Mars. He connected it to Earth. He said he was here now, in this life, because he had a mission. He had a warning to deliver. And that warning was about what's coming for us. According to Boriska, Earth was heading down the same path that destroyed Mars. He talked about energy wars. He talked about conflicts over resources that would spiral out of control. He described nuclear disasters that would poison entire regions. He spoke about the fall of Europe, about nations collapsing under the weight of crisis after crisis. And he said something that stuck with everyone in that room. The United States and the United Kingdom will face a final decision. What they choose will determine everything. Let me pause here for a second. Think about what an 11-year-old in 2007 would typically know about geopolitics. Not much, right? Maybe they'd know who the president is. Maybe they'd have a vague idea about wars happening somewhere far away. But Boriska was talking about energy conflicts, about nuclear tensions, about the specific role of specific nations in a global collapse. This wasn't child's play. This was something else entirely. The scientists in the room started asking him questions. How do you know this? Where does this information come from? And Boriska's answer was always the same. I remember. I've seen it before. I've lived through it before. One researcher asked him about specific technologies. Boriska described energy systems that didn't exist yet, at least not publicly. He talked about quantum mechanics in ways that suggested understanding, not just memorization. When pressed on details about Mars, he drew diagrams of underground structures, of machines, of systems that sounded like science fiction, but were described with the confidence of someone recalling their childhood home. Here's something that'll make your skin crawl. One of the scientists present that day later said in an interview that what disturbed him most wasn't what Boriska said, it was how he said it. There was no hesitation, no searching for words, no childish uncertainty. It was like listening to someone giving a report on something they'd witnessed firsthand. It was like listening to a survivor describe a tragedy they'd lived through. And then Boriska started talking about the future. Our future. He said that Europe would be the first to fall. Energy crises would cripple the continent. Wars over resources would break out. Nuclear incidents, whether accidental or intentional, would make large areas uninhabitable. He described a domino effect, where one crisis would trigger another and another until the entire system collapsed. But here's the part that made people really pay attention. He said this wouldn't happen all at once. It would be gradual, a slow burn. Things would get worse bit by bit, crisis by crisis, until one day people would wake up and realize they were living in a completely different world. And by then, he said, it might be too late to change course. Now, think about this for a moment. An 11-year-old in 2007 predicting gradual collapse through energy crises and resource wars. Does any of that sound familiar? Does any of that sound like things we've seen happening in the years since? Let me ask you something, and I want you to answer this honestly in the comments. What year are you watching this from? Seriously, drop a comment right now and tell me the year. Because depending on when you're watching this, Boriska's predictions might seem more or less accurate. And that's exactly what makes this story so unsettling. The further we get from 2007, the more his words seem to align with reality. In 2008, just a year after Boriska's statements, the global financial crisis hit. Energy prices spiked. In 2011, the Fukushima nuclear disaster showed the world just how vulnerable we are to nuclear catastrophe. In the years that followed, we saw the European debt crisis, the refugee crisis, rising tensions between nations over resources and energy. We saw conflicts in the Middle East that were fundamentally about control of oil and gas. We saw Russia and Ukraine clash over energy supplies to Europe. We saw Brexit. We saw the rise of nationalist movements across Europe as people lost faith in the existing system. I'm not saying Boriska predicted every single one of these events specifically, but the pattern he described, the gradual collapse through interconnected crises, energy conflicts, and nuclear threats, that pattern became our reality. And the scientists who heard him that day, some of them started taking him very seriously. Boriska became something of a phenomenon in Russia. Researchers wanted to study him. Journalists wanted to interview him. Some people called him a prophet. Others called him a fraud. His mother, Nadezhda Kaprianovich, tried to protect him from the attention, while also advocating for people to listen to his warnings. She insisted that her son was special, that he had knowledge that needed to be heard. But as Boriska got older, something strange started happening. He started giving fewer interviews. He became more withdrawn. Some people who tried to contact him found that he'd become difficult to reach. His public appearances became rarer and rarer. And then, around 2012 or 2013, something happened that nobody expected. Boriska disappeared. Not gradually, not slowly fading from public view. He actually vanished. He and his mother both disappeared without a clear trace. No forwarding address. No social media presence. No interviews. No updates. Nothing. It was as if they'd been erased. Now, This is where the story gets into conspiracy territory, and I want to be clear about something. I'm not here to tell you what to believe. I'm here to present the facts as they're known and let you draw your own conclusions. But the fact is, Boriska's disappearance raised a lot of questions. A lot of very disturbing questions. Some people believe he and his mother simply wanted privacy, that the attention became too much, that they wanted to live normal lives away from the spotlight. That's entirely possible. That's the rational explanation, the safe explanation, the explanation that lets us sleep at night. But let me tell you about the other theories, the ones that don't let you sleep so easily. There are people who believe Boriska was taken, not kidnapped in the traditional sense, but removed, extracted. By who? Well, that depends on which theory you follow. Some say Russian intelligence agencies, the FSB, got involved when they realized this boy was revealing information that shouldn't be public. Think about it. A child talking about future energy wars, about the fall of nations, about nuclear incidents. If any of that was based on classified intelligence or strategic projections, would the government just let him keep talking? Others believe it was international, that agencies from the United States, the United Kingdom, or even shadowy multinational organizations took interest. After all, Boriska specifically mentioned these countries. He said they would face the final decision. What if he knew something about plans, about operations, about strategies that were never meant to be public? What if his memories were actually leaked information from a source that couldn't be traced? Here's where it gets really dark. There are reports, unverified but persistent, that men in suits started showing up at Boriska's home in the months before he disappeared, asking questions, taking notes, being very interested in what this boy knew and how he knew it. His mother allegedly became frightened. She started limiting who could speak to her son. She stopped answering certain calls, and then they were gone. But here's what makes this even stranger. There are people who claim they've seen Boriska after his disappearance. Not in Russia, in other countries. A teenage boy matching his description spotted in Switzerland in 2015, speaking fluent German to a group of scientists. Another sighting in Chile in 2017, reportedly visiting astronomical observatories. A young man in Norway in 2019 who, when approached, smiled and said something cryptic before walking away. I'm not supposed to be in this timeline yet. Are these sightings real? Are they cases of mistaken identity? Are they people who desperately want the story to continue and see what they want to see? Or is something else going on? This brings us to the theory that genuinely makes my skin crawl, the time loop theory. What if Boriska disappeared because he had to? What if his presence in 2007, making those warnings, was always part of the timeline? And what if staying beyond a certain point would have created a paradox that couldn't be resolved? Think about it like this. If Boriska really was from the future, if he really had traveled back or somehow retained memories of future events, his very existence created a problem. Every person he talked to, every scientist he influenced, every journalist who reported his words, all of that changed the timeline. All of that created ripples in causality. There's a concept in temporal mechanics called the Novikov self-consistency principle. It suggests that if time travel is possible, the timeline will always arrange itself in a way that prevents paradoxes. If you go back in time to change something, the universe will ensure that your actions were always part of what happened. You can't change the past because your attempt to change it already happened. Now apply that to Boriska. If he came from the future with warnings, those warnings were always part of our timeline. His words were always meant to be spoken. But maybe, just maybe, his continued presence beyond a certain date would have created an impossible paradox. Maybe he had to disappear at exactly that moment to maintain timeline consistency. Or here's an even darker version of this theory. What if Boriska was pulled back? What if whatever mechanism brought him to our time, whether it was technology, consciousness transfer, or something we don't even have words for, what if it recalled him? What if there's a limit to how long a consciousness can exist outside its native timeline before causality itself ejects it? Some researchers who study temporal anomalies talk about something they call timeline elasticity. The idea that you can stretch time, bend it, create temporary loops or overlaps, but eventually it snaps back. Everything returns to where it belongs. If Bariska was a temporal anomaly, maybe his disappearance was simply the universe correcting itself, pulling him back to where and when he was supposed to be. Now, let me tell you about the final warning, because this is where everything gets really intense. Before he disappeared, there were rumors that Bariska gave one final warning, a message delivered in secret to a small group of people. Nobody knows exactly who these people were. Some say they were scientists he'd worked with. Others claim they were government officials who had been monitoring him. A few whisper that they were members of an organization that studies temporal phenomena, a group that operates in the shadows of the scientific community. Nobody knows exactly what he said in that final warning. But according to those rumors, it was urgent, it was specific, and it was terrifying. The message, according to these rumors, included a date, a specific date that represented a point of no return. After that date, the timeline he'd seen, the future he described, would become locked in, inevitable, unchangeable. Before that date, humanity still had the power to alter course. After it, the cascade of events would become irreversible. What was that date? Nobody who claims to know will say. Some argue that's because the date hasn't passed yet, and revealing it would cause panic. Others say it's because the date already passed while we were all distracted, and now it's too late. We're already in the timeline Bariska warned us about, and we don't even realize it. But here's the part that haunts me. Multiple sources, completely independent of each other, all mention the same phrase in connection with Bariska's final message. The phrase he allegedly repeated 3 times before disappearing. The future can be changed, but time is running out. 3 times. Like he was trying to make absolutely sure someone would remember it. Like it was the most important thing he could possibly say. And then, according to witnesses, something happened that nobody can adequately explain. The last confirmed sighting of Bariska was at his home in Volgograd. Several people saw him and his mother getting into a car. A black car with tinted windows and no license plates. The car drove away. And here's the part that makes no sense. Multiple people watched this car drive down a straight road with clear visibility for miles. But somewhere along that road, the car simply wasn't there anymore. It didn't turn off. It didn't speed away. It was there, and then it wasn't. One witness, an old man who lived along that road, said he saw the car shimmer, like heat distortion on a summer day. But it was winter. The air around the car seemed to vibrate. And then the car was gone. Just gone. Crazy, right? Impossible? Maybe. But that's the story that persists. That's what people say they saw. Now, let's talk about the Mars connection, because this ties directly into the time travel theory in ways that most people miss. When Bariska talked about his memories of Mars, he wasn't just describing a past life in the spiritual sense. He was describing it with temporal specificity. He talked about Martian civilization as if it existed in the past, but he also talked about it as if it existed in the future, as if time wasn't linear for him, as if past and future were positions he could access equally. What if Mars wasn't his past life? What if it was his future? What if the destruction he remembered wasn't something that happened long ago, but something that will happen and his consciousness somehow experienced it in advance? There's a theory in quantum mechanics about retrocausality, the idea that effects can precede their causes, that information can flow backward through time. What if Bariska's consciousness was experiencing retrocausal information? What if his brain was receiving memories from a future that hasn't happened yet in our timeline? And here's where it gets really interesting. What if Mars and Earth are connected in a temporal loop? What if the destruction of Mars that Bariska described is actually Earth's future, and his memories of Mars were really memories of what will happen to us? What if he was describing Earth's fate, but calling it Mars because that's how his child brain could process information that shouldn't exist? Think about the parallels. He described energy wars on Mars. We're facing energy wars on Earth. He described nuclear catastrophe on Mars. We're living under the threat of nuclear catastrophe on Earth. He described underground civilizations on Mars trying to survive the collapse. And what are we building? Underground bunkers, doomsday shelters, seed vaults buried deep in mountains. What if Bariska wasn't remembering a different planet? What if he was remembering our planet at a different time? What if Mars was always Earth, just in a future so transformed by catastrophe that it might as well be an alien world? I know this sounds insane. I know how it sounds. But stay with me because there's more. There are other cases like Bariska. Not many, but they exist. Children around the world who claim memories of other lives, other places, other times. Most are dismissed. Most fade away as the children grow older. But some remain consistent. Some never recant. Some disappear, just like Bariska. In India, there's been a documented case of a child who described technological systems that didn't exist yet, who talked about environmental collapse and resource wars. In Brazil, a girl who spoke about watching cities drown and billions of people displaced. In Australia, a boy who drew detailed diagrams of machines he said were used in the last days to try to save humanity. Different countries, different cultures, different children, but the same warnings, the same sense of urgent knowledge that shouldn't exist. And in many cases, the same eventual silence or disappearance when they get too specific, too accurate, too dangerous. Is this a pattern? Is there something happening with human consciousness that we don't understand? Are some people, especially children whose brains are still developing and perhaps more open to nonlinear time perception, are they somehow accessing information from possible futures? Or is something else reaching out to us through these children? Is the future itself trying to warn the past? Is there a version of humanity ahead in time that's desperately trying to send messages back, try to change the timeline, try and prevent the catastrophe they're living through? Let me ask you something. Drop it in the comments right now, because I really want to know what you think. Do you believe consciousness can exist outside of linear time? Do you think it's possible that some people, like Bariska, can access memories or information from other points in the timeline? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and this is the kind of discussion we need to be having. Here's what we know about time that most people don't think about. Time isn't actually linear in the way we experience it. Einstein proved that. Time bends. Time dilates. Time is relative to the observer. At quantum scales, particles can exist in superposition, being in multiple states simultaneously until observed. Quantum entanglement allows particles to affect each other instantaneously across any distance, as if space and time don't separate them at all. If particles can do this, if matter and energy can behave in ways that ignore our conventional understanding of time and causality, why couldn't consciousness? Consciousness is still one of the greatest mysteries in science. We don't know what it is. We don't know how it emerges. We don't know its limits. What if consciousness is quantum in nature? What if it's not bound by time the way matter is? What if people like Bariska are accessing a quantum state of consciousness? A state where past, present, and future exist simultaneously, where information can be drawn from any point in the timeline. And what if children are more capable of this because their brains haven't yet been trained to filter reality through the lens of linear time? As we age, we learn to experience time as a sequence, one moment after another, cause before effect. But babies don't have that framework yet. Young children live much more in the present moment, with a fluid relationship to time. What if that fluidity is actually more accurate to nature of reality? And as we grow up, we lose that capability. We train ourselves out of it. Maybe Bariska never lost it. Maybe he remained connected to that quantum consciousness state longer than most. Maybe that's why he could access information from the future, or from Mars, or from wherever and whenever his consciousness was tapping into. And maybe that's why he had to disappear. Maybe remaining in that state indefinitely, maintaining that connection while physically existing in linear time. Maybe that creates too much stress on the fabric of causality. Maybe he was pulled back to his origin point, whenever and wherever that actually is, to prevent a catastrophic temporal paradox. The Novikov principle says the universe self-corrects to prevent paradoxes. What if Bariska's disappearance was that self-correction? What if the universe looked at this anomaly, this boy carrying future knowledge in a past timeline, and said this can't continue and remove him from the equation? But if that's true, why let him speak at all? Why allow those years of warnings if he was just going to be erased? Unless the warnings themselves were always part of the timeline. unless his brief presence, his urgent messages, his specific predictions, unless all of that was supposed to happen. Maybe we were always meant to hear what he had to say. And maybe what we do with that information is the actual test. This is the part that keeps me awake at night. If Bariska was removed from our timeline to prevent a paradox, but his warnings remain, what does that mean? It means the information is still here. It's still active. It's still changing things, changing us, changing the future. His physical presence might be gone, but his impact on causality continues. Every person who heard him speak, every scientist who took notes, every journalist who wrote articles, every person watching this video right now, we're all part of the ripple effect. We're all carrying forward the information he brought to our time. We're all, in a sense, agents of temporal change now. And maybe that was the point. Maybe one person carrying future knowledge creates too much of a paradox to sustain. But that knowledge distributed among thousands or millions of people, that's different. That's information diffused through the timeline in a way that the universe can accommodate. That's how you change the future without breaking causality. So, let's talk about what this all means. Let's talk about the bigger picture here. Because this isn't just about one boy and his strange claims. This is about something much larger. If Bariska was telling the truth, if he really did have memories of a past life on Mars, or if he really could see the future somehow, what does that mean? It means that time isn't what we think it is. It means that consciousness might be able to travel in ways we don't understand. It means that the future might not be fixed, that it might be changeable, but only if we know what's coming and act on that knowledge. And if Bariska was making it all up, if he was just an incredibly creative child with an active imagination, what does that mean? It means he accidentally predicted patterns that turned out to be real. It means he somehow intuited the direction the world was heading when he was just 11 years old. And honestly, that might be just as remarkable as if he really was a time traveler. Here's what we know for certain. A boy in Russia made specific predictions about the future. Those predictions involved energy crises, resource wars, nuclear incidents, and the gradual collapse of European stability. In the years since, we've seen energy crises, resource conflicts, nuclear scares, and significant instability in Europe. That's not interpretation. That's documented reality. We also know that this boy disappeared along with his mother, and despite the internet age we live in, despite the fact that it's nearly impossible to truly vanish in the modern world, nobody seems to know where they are. Now, I want to circle back to something Bariska said that I think is the most important part of this entire story. He said the United States and the United Kingdom would face a final decision, that what these nations chose to do would determine the fate of the world. Think about that. In 2007, an 11-year-old Russian boy said that the future of humanity would rest on decisions made by the US and UK, not Russia, not China, not the European Union as a whole, specifically the United States and United Kingdom. At the time, that might have seemed like an odd thing to say, but think about what's happened since. Think about the role these nations have played in global events. Think about the decisions they've faced regarding energy policy, military intervention, nuclear deterrence, international cooperation. Think about Brexit and what it meant for European unity. Think about American foreign policy and its global impact. Was Bariska right? Are we approaching that final decision he mentioned? Or have we already made it without realizing? Here's what keeps me up at night about this story. It's not whether Bariska was telling the truth or not. It's the fact that whether he was a genuine time traveler, a boy with impossible memories, or just an unusually perceptive child, the warning he gave us was the same. And that warning is looking more and more relevant with each passing year. We are facing energy crises. We are facing resource conflicts. We are facing the possibility of nuclear incidents. We are watching systems that seem stable begin to crack under pressure. And we're doing it all while pretending that everything is fine, that this is all normal, that there's nothing to worry about. Maybe Bariska's real gift wasn't seeing the future. Maybe it was seeing the present clearly enough to know where it leads. Maybe he looked at the trajectory we were on and simply calculated the destination. And maybe that's why his message was so urgent, because he could see that we were refusing to acknowledge what was right in front of us. Let me ask you something. If you could go back in time and warn people about a disaster that was coming, would you? Of course you would. And how do you think people would react? Would they listen? Would they thank you? Or would they call you crazy? Would they dismiss you? Would they make you disappear? Throughout history, we've had people who warned us about what was coming. Scientists who warned about climate change decades before it became undeniable. Economists who warned about financial crises before they hit. Experts who warned about pandemics before they swept the globe. And what did we do? We ignored them. We dismissed them. We waited until the disaster was already upon us before we took them seriously. Maybe that's what happened with Boriska. Maybe we had a chance to listen to a warning, whether it came from the future, from Mars, or from an unusually aware child, and we chose not to take it seriously. And maybe by the time we realized we should have listened, it was too late. He was already gone. So where does that leave us now? If Boriska's timeline was real, if there really is a point of no return approaching, how close are we to it? Are we already past it? Or do we still have time to change course? I don't have those answers. Nobody does, not anymore. Not with Boriska gone. But I think the message is clear whether you believe his story or not. The future isn't fixed. The path we're on leads somewhere, and we can see the direction even if we can't see the final destination. And we have a choice, always a choice, about whether to keep walking that path or to find a different one. The United States and United Kingdom face a final decision, he said. Maybe we all face that decision. Maybe it's not about nations at all. Maybe it's about humanity as a whole deciding what kind of future we want and whether we're willing to do what it takes to create it. Here's what I believe after researching this story, after looking at what Boriska said and what's happened since. I believe that whether he was a time traveler or not, whether his memories were real or not, he saw something true. He saw the danger we're in. He saw how fragile our systems are. He saw how close we are to catastrophic failure. And he tried to warn us. And we did what humans always do with warnings. We listened for a moment, got uncomfortable, and then went back to our lives pretending everything was fine. But it's not fine. Look around. Look at the world we're living in. Look at the crises stacking up, the tensions rising, the systems straining. Look at how energy has become a weapon. Look at how nuclear threats are back on the table. Look at how quickly things can fall apart. Boriska said the future can be changed. I choose to believe that's true. I choose to believe that we're not locked into a predetermined path, that we still have agency, that we still have time. But I also believe that time is running out, just like he said. We can't keep ignoring the warnings. We can't keep pretending that everything will somehow work itself out. If you watched this far, thank you. Thank you for caring enough about this mystery to stick with me through this entire story. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do it now. We're building a community here of people who ask questions, who look deeper, who refuse to just accept the official narratives. We need you. Click that subscribe button. Leave a comment telling me what you think about Boriska's story. Do you believe him? Do you think he was silenced? Do you think his warning matters? And here's the really important question I want you to think about. If Boriska could see you right now, watching this video, what do you think he would want you to do with the information you've just learned? Would he want you to panic? No. Would he want you to feel helpless? No. I think he'd want you to wake up, to pay attention, to recognize that the future isn't something that happens to us. It's something we create choice by choice, day by day. And maybe that was his real message all along. The boy from the future, or from Mars, or from imagination so powerful it touched something real, tried to tell us something important. He tried to show us where we're headed. And then he disappeared, leaving us with only his words and the question of whether we'll listen. In Volgograd, in that city built in the memory of one of history's bloodiest battles, a boy once stood in front of adults and said, "I've already seen how it all ends." But he also said the future can be changed. Those two statements together are the key to everything. Yes, there's a destination we're heading toward if we stay on this path. But no, we don't have to stay on this path. Every crisis Boriska predicted, every disaster he warned about, they're not inevitable. They're the consequence of choices. And different choices lead to different consequences. That's not mysticism. That's not prophecy. That's just logic. That's just how time works, how cause and effect works, how reality works. The question isn't whether Bariska could really see the future. The question is whether we can see the present clearly enough to understand what it's becoming, and whether we care enough to do something about it. I started this video by asking you to think about someone who knows things they shouldn't know. A child with old eyes. Someone carrying the weight of knowledge that doesn't fit their age. Maybe you've met someone like that. Maybe you felt that way yourself sometimes, like you know something important that you can't quite articulate. That's not magic. That's not supernatural. That's just being awake. That's just being aware. That's just being willing to see what's really happening instead of what we wish was happening. Bariska Kapryanovich was awake. Whether his memories were real or not, whether he came from Mars and future, or just from a mind that could see patterns others missed, he was awake, and he tried to wake us up too. So here we are, years later, watching his predictions align with reality one by one, watching the world follow the path he described, watching the crises stack up exactly like he said they would. And he's gone. The boy who saw it all is gone. We can't ask him for more details. We can't ask him what to do. We can't ask him if it's too late. We're on our own now, with only his warning echoing through time. The future can be changed, but time is running out. Believe his story or don't believe it. That's up to you. But don't ignore the warning. Don't ignore what's happening around us. Don't ignore the choice we all face about what kind of future we're going to create. Because maybe that's the real test. Maybe that's why the story matters. Not because of where Bariska came from, but because of where we're going. Not because he could see the future, but because we can change it. If you're watching this video from the future, from a time beyond where I am now, I hope you're watching from a world that made different choices. I hope you're watching from a timeline where we listened to the warnings, where we acted in time, where we proved that the future really can be changed. And if you're watching from the same dark timeline Bariska tried to warn us about, I hope this video serves as a reminder that we had a chance, that someone tried to tell us, that we knew, even if we didn't want to admit it. The boy from Volgograd is gone, but his message remains. What we do with it is up to us. Subscribe to this channel, share this video, and most importantly, stay awake. The future is being written right now, in this moment, by the choices we make and the choices we refuse to make. This is the story of the child who said he came from the future, but maybe it's really the story of the future we're creating right now. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Assuming there's a next video, assuming we all make the right choices to ensure there's a future where stories like this can still be told. Stay curious, stay aware, and remember what Bariska said. The future can be changed, but time is running out.